Sea of Stars is a phenomenal game, but to accurately try and review it, we have to remove ourselves of the primary biases that people enter it with. This namely entails how marketing of the game was almost always paired up with the words Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, and of course Yasunori Misida. Instead, let's view this game for what it is on its own, and I believe it is more than fair to call it an indie gaming triumph. Hey everyone, it's Yggdrasil, and today we are going to talk about Sea of Stars. We'll be discussing the core components of the game while doing our very best to leave story spoilers and character discussions until the very end of the video, and I of course will warn you ahead of time so you can click off of it if you've yet to finish playing through this wonderful game yourself. Let's begin then with the principal foundation of any game world, the world itself. Now, as an avid reader of lore in any gaming world, let me say I was absolutely smitten with the way that Sea of Stars presents its world building. Yes, we have the early expenditures paired up with the tutorial, setting up the premise and revealing the main motives for the first leg of the journey, but I'm really just talking about what we see around us. Sea of Stars does not use its worldly assets blindly. Everything has some manner of meaning that will tell a part of the story it wants to present. The best part of this game's lore setup, however, that makes it a win for just about everyone, is that much of the lore is completely optional. Now you see this sweet little nerdy bean right here, well my friend, her name is Teaks, and if you want to geek out, Teaks is your gal. There are so many artifacts scattered throughout this world, and by presenting them to her, she can tell you not only what that artifact is, but how it relates to the history of the world. So why did I call this the best part of the world building? It's for two reasons. One, again, it's optional. Players who are more combat oriented than lore oriented, well, you don't need to pay any attention to Teaks' tales. Two, if you do choose to read these, your experience of the story is extremely enhanced, because while some artifacts do add to the history of the world, other stories will provide extra details that will be directly involved in the main campaign. Want to know more about that legendary pirate ship you want to use for yourself? Or maybe why there's a giant sleeping dragon nestled in the mountainside? Maybe learn just what the heck are those giant stone constructs yeeting you around from island to island? Well, Teaks' Knowledge Emporium has got you covered. And even without all that dusty lore mumbo jumbo, let's just take a look at this world for what it is. From a simple moonlit starting town, traversing the mountaintops, a mining moleman village, vibrant port towns, swamps riddled with undead, an ocean in a pocket universe ruled by a legendary ghost pirate? And that's only just some of the first areas in the first few hours of this game. There's also plenty to do in this world. There's the usual batch of side quests, but there's also recipes, relics, and rare valuables to collect, an in-universe minigame of Wheels to master in which I am the undisputed champion of in all of these taverns, and figures to collect, a Sea Conch collectathon, fishing, quizzing minigames, and much, much more. The dungeons are all magnificently done as well. Short and sweet, puzzles don't often consume too much time or focus, and the themes and designs are all on point. Heck, I don't even remember when's the last time I enjoyed the concept for a water temple as much as I did with the one in Sea of Stars. All of these zones are accompanied by a gorgeous original soundtrack encompassing over 200 tracks. And of course, to explore is one thing, but in order to do that, we need some tools of the trade. We need to talk about combat. Now again, we are going to do our best to ignore the roots and inspirations of the combat and solely focus on what Sabotage Studio has brought to the table. Sea of Stars is a turn-based combat system where enemy actions act on a timer, and in the meantime you act on which character you want to throw first. By pressing A at the right time, you can either increase your damage or mitigate the hit you're about to take, and many skills and specials such as Moonring are heavily reliant on timing things just right. There's also systems such as live mana and ultimate abilities that will charge up over time till it's ready to be used. Combat is made very openly for players who care more for the story than the combat itself. There are multiple optional relics that make combat almost mind-numbingly easier to get through, or even more brain-bashedly hard if you are up for the challenge. All in all, it's extremely fun to play with in the beginning. Every fight, every mob feels like a puzzle. Granted, a very hard-hitting puzzle if you make a mistake, but a rewarding one nonetheless. So then, it may surprise you when I say that after some amount of time, I began to feel the combat stagnate a little. That's not to say it wasn't fun. In fact, I avidly enjoy this style of gameplay. It's just that Sea of Stars offers the vast majority of its combat mechanics right out of the gate. By 2 hours in, all of the main systems are in place. New characters introduce new elements, sure, but the story's progress will give you just an ultimate per character. There really aren't any supplemental mechanics that will shake up or enhance combat after you learn live mana. Yes, there are quite a few elements at play in combat, but if you've picked up on combat at hour 2, then you know how combat will feel at hour 20 at endgame. If it were up to me, I would have placed one additional combat mechanic close to midway into the journey, or even hold off on live mana until later on in the game, say maybe after meeting the 5th party member. Again, of course that is just my take and fully subjective, so let's move on. We've discussed what we can so far without delving into spoiler territory, but it is indeed time to talk about the characters and the story itself. For those of you who don't want any particular spoiled, I highly suggest you click off this video, and I thank you for giving it a watch. For those of you still with me, let's get right into it. So then, the characters themselves, and I've got to be completely honest here, I don't all too much care for our primary protagonists, Zael and Valeer. I like their designs and the themes they tried to represent and go for, but as for the characters themselves, there isn't all too much there. Garl is great. He's boisterous, outgoing, and willing to get things done even when he knows it's going to put him in great jeopardy. In fact, it's not until Garl actually does bite off more than he can chew that Zael and Valeer have really one of the only meaningful moments of growth that their characters have, shared between them over the loss of their best friend. Their mission really never changes, and their outlook never even remotely wavers. They don't really bother to try and reflect on the motives that pushed Erlina and Brugaves to betray their order, nor do they seek any sort of role outside that of the duties they were born for as Solstice warriors. Perhaps a part of this was influenced by the decision to make the two characters interchangeable as the front character, therefore they couldn't stray too much with those characters. But then again, they also just progress the story fine regardless, so I can't really say. I just wish they had a bit something more. Something perhaps like personal internal conflicts that reach further beyond just a few riddles and wizened old words throughout the journey. On to Sarai. She is a perfect spoof of a character. You know the gimmick with her right from the get-go, but you still get that feeling that something is being purposely withheld right up until the events surrounding the titular Sea of Stars comes to light. However, it's going to end up being Roshan who ends up being my favorite character. I am absolutely in awe of how well they handled designing this ancient, wizened character who has precise yet strict rules that literally have cosmic-sized implications should they be broken. And yet for all of his powers, he is just as fallible as a deity as he was when he was simply a man. And lastly, we have Bust, or should I say the Bust boy, who I personally think is robbed of more time in this game for having been placed so close to the end of it all. Less than a handful of endgame dungeons and the overworld bosses, and really that's all there is for him to join on. I will say his story for Seeking Revenge is pretty good, and his animations are my favorite amongst the whole group. I just wish we got to see his leg in the journey take form a little bit earlier on. And speaking of that journey, let's tackle that next. To be completely honest, I have no qualms about most of the journey. I've already discussed how the world at large feels, and to go through it all is a treat. The main journey is intrinsically tied to the world itself and what part you are in it, and it reacts quite nicely to what the main party goes and does. Instead of covering the whole journey then, I'd like to discuss two pivotal moments in tandem with one another. That being the events of the Clockwork Castle and the end of the game itself. What occurs at the Clockwork Castle is a fantastic and foreboding culmination of the events that have led to that point thus far. Roshan's strict rules forcibly broken, the ultimate dweller's birth, and a confrontation with not only the Acolytes, not only Erlina and Brugaves, but also meeting face to face with the Fleshmancer Aforel himself. My mind was racing as to how this could play out, but it also made me think of just what could come. In my head, this moment set up the entire endgame. I can picture a fallen Brugaviz morphed into an abomination twisted by the false musings of the Fleshmancer, a demonic Erlina empowered enough to make her destiny her own, the Acolyte's will and might fused with the Dweller of Strife, and above all, Aphorel himself. So imagine my stunning disappointment then, when all is said and done and the party stands in the Fleshmancer's own domain, that we just take on 2 last-minute throw-ins and only the empowered Erlina, with the World Eater confrontation being shooed into the endgame segment. Keep in mind here, I'm not at all discussing the quote-unquote true ending of the game, but rather that first ending that everyone will see regardless of if they wish to pursue more of what the game offers or not. The true ending fight with Aphorel isn't involved in this. This is what most players will choose to experience, and more casual enjoyers of the game, which I'm sure will be the majority of players, well, they won't feel motivated to pursue the true actual endgame. They will only see Aphorel and Roshan flicker away to who knows where, the World Eater defeated in the background, and only the confrontation with Elisandrel be the only fully involved confrontational aspect of their primary run. To see what actually occurs in the true ending is so much more valuable, but a large majority of those players I feel just won't have stuck around the first time after fighting Elisandrel and not beating up the Fleshmancer to see it through to fruition. What's more, I really did just want to see that high-stakes gauntlet against all the aforementioned opponents who had been really well set up after Clockwork Castle. I just really have to leave it as feeling that the first primary ending is a little bit of a betrayal in the setup of these villains and fallen heroes, and I wish that instead of having a base ending and a true ending, we just had one solid, finite ending that let us tackle all of what remained, rather than let people like myself feel that something was left out the first time around. But that is going to be it for me for this video. I hope that you all enjoyed what I had to say about the Sea of Stars. From start to finish, it was an absolute blast for me. I've already gotten my pre-order for the physical collector's edition set up, and I cannot wait to play it all over again. But if there's anything you want to discuss, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, I encourage you to please leave it a like and subscribe to my channel for more RPG, Nintendo, and general gaming content. As always, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you all have a great day.